Next, we want to look at some of the threats and attacks that can be sustained by web applications. This is the OWASP Top 10 Security Risks for 2017, and we're going to look at some of these. So let's just have an overview. Injection, where you take a web form or URL and you put stuff into the reply that shouldn't be there. Broken authentication, sensitive data exposure, XML, external entity or XXE, broken access control, security misconfiguration, cross-site scripting, insecure deserialization, using components with known vulnerabilities, and lastly is insufficient logging and monitoring. So these top 10 security risks, we need to have a look at them. Number one, injection. With injection, what happens is the attacker takes advantage of the fact that the application will allow untrusted data to be sent into the application and interpreted and executed as part of the command or executed as part of the query. And so what they do is take advantage of these injection flaws and they put in malicious queries through structured query language, or make commands, or even through LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which is used for directory services like Active Directory. So another one would be broken authentication. With broken authentication, you know how we were talking about man in the middle attacks and so on, how you can take advantage of session management issues? Well, with broken authentication, you can do that. Vulnerabilities in authentication also. If you look here, this is very similar to a man in the middle attack where we're sniffing the session network traffic, and then we are getting session IDs, and we're using those to conduct malicious attacks. Over here, we have password exploitation, where we go to that web app and we may find for instance, a password database associated with that web app. And if they're encrypted or not encrypted, we can use tools and techniques to exploit those passwords. There's also timeouts with web applications, web servers, and all the instrumentation and software. Sometimes the timeouts give the attacker the advantage. For instance, there's an application and the timeouts aren't set properly. So the user clicks close on the browser, but their information, like cookies or session information, is still valid. So somebody who has access to that can exploit that, escalate privilege, do all kinds of damage. Another one is sensitive data exposure. So for instance, what I can do as an attacker, since I have weakly protected data like credit card numbers or whatever, go to the code and just open it up and look at it. And there might be plain text information in the code right there for me to read. Right? With secure code, you're going to encode all that sensitive information, so it's not so easy to read. And so sensitive data exposure is one that we can easily avoid by making secure code. The next one we have is XML external entity. So inside a web app, there could be a lot of XML going on. And an XML external entity is a type of SSRF, which is a server-side request forgery attack. And what's the problem? XML is misconfigured. So there's an XML parser, and what happens is the XML parser should only allow specific entities within the web services area to be able to do communications. But in the case of XML external entity, an external entity like you or me who is attacking or hacking the resource can send in a request. And when we send in the request, it's malicious. And that malicious request allows an answer to be sent. This response is TMI. What does the response TMI mean? Too much information. So as you can see here, it says that this web server is running Ubuntu. We don't want an attacker to know that. Look at the version 1804. We don't want an attacker to know that. And just information about that web server, about that web application, We really don't want an attacker to know that. So we want to protect against XXCs. The next one we look at is broken access control. Broken access control, what will happen is the attacker will already have identified a flaw in access control that allows them to bypass authentication to compromise the network. And so rather than getting denied, you have no access to this, the attacker will actually get root or administrative privileges, allowing them to create, update, delete, do whatever they want to wreak havoc in that application. Then we go to security misconfiguration. And for instance, there could be unvalidated inputs. Let's say you have a form. The form has first name and last name and other things you need to fill in. But what if the form allows 255 characters for the first or the last name? What if the form allows you to use any character you want? I do not know a lot of people, let me look on my keyboard, that have $, ampersand, star, and other things in their name. Do you know people with that in their name? I don't either. So what we want to do is validate everything that gets put into there. So instead of 255 characters in the name fields, we only allow 20 characters or something like that, maybe a little bit more. Instead of allowing every single possible combination, maybe dashes and hyphens, right? For like O'Reilly and stuff like that. So, and then if anybody puts in any characters, whether it's Kevin or O'Reilly or Bob or Francesca, and they hit enter on the form for the first name and the last name, and for every field, we validate. We look for things like SQL injection, and we look for LDAP injection, and we look for people who are trying to hack the form. So we validate all the inputs into the form. The next thing we have is parameter tampering, where we can manipulate parameters that are exchanged between the client and the web server. Remember I was telling you about that URL, and remember the question mark. And to the right of that question mark are the parameters. With parameter tampering, those parameters can be manipulated. And when those parameters are manipulated and you hit enter, it sends that information into the web server and it's processed, and that can cause issues. One type of parameter tampering attack can change the price that's in the URL from $1,000 to $1. You hit enter, and then you go to your box where you've purchased the device, and they say, congratulations, you've purchased this device for $1, and it will be delivered by September or whatever, right? So that's parameter or form tampering. Improper error handling is when there's TMI, too much information that's being released in the error message, allowing the attacker to identify even more vulnerabilities and launch more attacks. And there could be weak algorithms that are used at the transport layer that allow the attacker to get extra information to use in other attacks, or actually attack the transport layer security. One of the most, I guess, popular types of attacks that we see is cross-site scripting. So with some of the web scanners that we've talked about before, you can scan a website and find a website that's vulnerable to cross-site scripting. When an attacker finds a website that's vulnerable to cross-site scripting, they can upload code to that website, putting malicious scripts. And then instead of a normal response when a user visits that website, they will instead get the code. So in this case, there's a little pop-up with an OK button, and it's natural for someone to want to click the OK button. When you do, you run that code, and whatever it is that is in that script that the attacker has, the target of the attack, well, it's kind of random people in some cases, will be served that code, redirected, hacked, or whatever it is with that exploit code. So that is cross-site scripting. Often cross-site scripting attacks won't be from random visitors to web pages, but the attacker will export the cross-site scripting attack by putting together phishing emails with links to the compromised page in that server. Another one is insecure deserialization. And no, it has nothing to do with good taste in breakfast cereal. This is a different type of serialization. As you can see, it's even spelled differently. What deserialization is if you look at, let's say, a web form that somebody's filling in with a name and age and all that kind of stuff, they put that information in. That information needs to be put into a form that can be transmitted across the wire and that's readable to other computer systems. And when it gets where it's going, it's read and deserialized into a database, for instance. But in the case of insecure deserialization, no process, no procedure is protecting this serialized data. So the attacker intercepts the serialized data and puts their own attack in it, allowing them to take down an unsuspecting user. So when you build a web application or a big website, it's not just a bunch of HTML. There are many different components that go into making that site. So like for instance, I was just talking about a web form. If you're not that good at creating web forms, you can go get a component that does web forms and just use it for your web forms. You can get components for sales on the website, components that generate and make useful all kinds of procedures and items in a website. These components, though, can have vulnerabilities that are already well known, so that if somebody scans your web server, your website, and they find that component, they can go to the Google hacking database and get step-by-step instructions in some cases to hacking your website. So make sure you scan all the components of your web application, of your web server, to make sure that those components don't already have known problems. Also, there's insufficient logging and monitoring. It takes an average of 208 days for an organization to realize that they have been attacked. I was talking about that when we were talking about APTs. And so an attacker that has a resource that is not logged, not monitored, they can spend all the time they want. They can spend 208 days. They can spend 2,000 days hacking away at the resources until they finally figure out a way in. And then finally, when you look and see what happened, you have no idea, how did someone just now hack into this resource? Oh, they've been working on it for a year and a half. But nobody knew because you had insufficient logging, insufficient monitoring. So it's very important to log and monitor every single resource in your entire enterprise.